Chris Levens, your four-eyed professor, and thanks for getting on the podcast today. Today, the title is Making the Invisible Visible. And I have a couple of guests, Dr. Stephen Ferrucci from the Sepulveda VA out in California, and Dr. Jessica Haynes from Charles Retina Institute in Memphis, Tennessee. And the main focus is to talk about what is really big news these days, which is geographic atrophy. And the earliest diagnosis, as with a lot of things, is the most critical thing to do. So quality scans to really identify the proper layers of the retina which can be affected are really crucial, because the numbers are staggering, with over approximately 1 million people in the US losing vision from this condition, which goes incredibly fast, with inability to drive in less than 2 years and blindness in the better seeing eye in approximately 6 years. This is just a really big deal. So we're going to start talking about quality images in partnership with Heidelberg Engineering, and then we're going to pivot into some really important details with your patient analyses for identification of geographic atrophy. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you really like it. Chris Levens, your four-eyed professor, and thanks for getting on the podcast today. Today, the title is Making the Invisible Visible. And I have a couple of guests, Dr. Stephen Ferrucci from the Sepulveda VA out in California, and Dr. Jessica Haynes from Charles Retina Institute in Memphis, Tennessee. And the main focus is to talk about what is really big news these days, which is geographic atrophy. And the earliest diagnosis, as with a lot of things, is the most critical thing to do. So quality scans to really identify the proper layers of the retina which can be affected are really crucial, because the numbers are staggering, with over approximately 1 million people in the US losing vision from this condition, which goes incredibly fast, with inability to drive in less than 2 years and blindness in the better seeing eye in approximately 6 years. This is just a really big deal. So we're going to start talking about quality images in partnership with Heidelberg Engineering, and then we're going to pivot into some really important details with your patient analyses for identification of geographic atrophy. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you really like it.
This is a Defocus Media production.
Hey everybody, I'm your four-eyed professor, Chris Levens, and I'm super excited to talk to you today. Our roll call is for new and experienced ODs, optometry students, and even those just interested in this profession. We'll cover a number of topics together, and I'll help you see them through a professor's eyes. Please take your seats. School's in session.
Jessica, it's good to see your face and not just hear your voice. Thank you for coming back and joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I'm happy to be back.
Walk us through as we get started what your day-to-day is. I'll just, lead off with the fact that you are seeing patients at arguably one of the most famous retina practices in the world, Charles Retina Institute. But expand on that for us.
Yeah, so I work primarily in a retina clinic, Charles Retina Institute. That's where I am most of the time. I do also work part-time at Southern College of Optometry in their advanced care ocular disease clinic. But for the most part, when I'm at Charles Retina, I am seeing patients who have retina problems. So earlier today, I saw about 50 plus patients, all of whom had retina problems, many OCT images done. So that's what I do most days.
All right. Our next guest is Dr. Stephen Ferrucci. And his claims to fame is he's a coworker of Dr. McDreamy. Did I get that right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I don't know coworker. I've never actually seen him working, but at the VA that I practice at in Los Angeles, they used to film Grey's Anatomy there. So I've met most of the cast. I tried to get discovered, but it never worked. So here I am.
Well, this is going to be your foray into stardom right here, right now.
One can only hope.
All right. So as we get started, I want you both to flash back to a time where you just weren't that fluid in retinal pathology or eye disease in general, or just didn't feel as confident as you do. And in that perspective, would you agree that ECPs are generally intimidated by retinal diseases and diagnoses?
I think so. I think the retina scares people a little bit. And probably because if you miss something in the retina, it can have such devastating visual consequences, obviously. And it is a big learning curve and how to get really good at interpreting these retinal images. So it's a little bit of a high stakes game. And I think for that reason, folks do tend to be a little on the conservative side about what they may refer out and what they may not refer out, especially if they're not feeling super confident about
Okay,
it.
makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, things like glaucoma, as an example, not saying it's not serious, but, you have some time sometimes in certain cases, but very often it's a more slowly progressive disease. Sometimes a retina care, it's things that happen more quickly. So not diagnosing it or sending it out can be, astronomical. The one thing I would say, I remember a time being old like I am. Jessica probably doesn't remember these days, but we didn't have an OCT, right? And, the thing that I would say is I think the OCT really lets us know a lot more, gives us a lot more information, and makes us a lot smarter, if you will, than we were prior to that. I mean, it's much easier to look for edema and see edema and see other types of diseases that were very, frankly, quite hard before OCT. I worked at an Indian health facility before OCT, and you'd be trying to look for a patient with a 90, 78. I don't think they have diabetic macular edema. Maybe not. Maybe they do. I don't know. But now certainly with an OCT, it's much, much easier to see things like that. So, the advantage is it gives us a big, it's a great tool that gives us a great advantage to see things in a way we couldn't previously.
Yeah. Additionally, from an academic perspective, we learned retina with drawings and histology slides. Never could we visualize the retina like we can teach it today in real-time cross-section. It's just, it's way different.
100%.
So, Jessica, you touched on this a little bit in that your day-to-day included a lot of scan analysis. And so, and Stephen, you also mentioned the importance of using instrumentation to really help us be better doctors and perform better doctoring. Is employing an instrument that provides the greatest visual detail regarding something like individual retinal layers a benefit to be able to determine pathology? And if yes, to what extent?
Oh, yeah. I mean, to a huge extent. There's so many things that you can see on the OCT, like Steve mentioned, that you can't see these things in real life. Steve was accurate in saying that I have never practiced in a time before OCT. So, I mean, I think about that a lot, where you're thinking, you have these patients, their vision is down, you can get an OCT. Sometimes you can see why their vision is down or why they have a certain symptom when there's no way you could have seen that clinically. And then sometimes you can at least confirm that there's nothing going on in the retina. And I can't imagine how unnerving that would be to have, these patients who have decreased vision, complaints, and you're looking in there, you can't see anything wrong, and you don't have any other tool to help you evaluate the retina. So there's so many things that you can see that you can't see clinically. I had one just a few days ago that, she had this tiny little smudgy spot in her vision. I can't remember what she was referred for, maybe just retina eval. And she had the slightest VMT, those disrupting receptors. Nobody would have known that was there without the OCT.
Right.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, I agree 100%. You can see the retina like you never could before, but you can't. The OCT it's a great tool, but that's all it is, right? And you have to take it in context. You have to take it in the clinical context of the patient, and what's going on with the patient, the demographics, and that sort of thing. So it's a great tool. But it's not to be used, in my opinion, in a vacuum, right? It's just one more piece of the puzzle, and you have to kind of work it in with that. Nothing upsets me more, and I don't know, Jessica, I know you, Chris, I know you do as well, but, I'll do an OCT lecture, and after the lecture, invariably, someone comes up with a picture and just stuffs it in my face and says, "What is this?" Right? Well, you can't say what something is without knowing the whole story. So,
Right.
you have to look at it. You have to examine the retina, look at the scans, but you also have to relate it to the patient and what the whole story is.
That is so true, Steve. We get these photos, same thing through text messages. What is this? What's wrong with the person? Are they okay? Do they need to come see you? Or like, I don't know, based off this one scan. That's such a good point. It's a tool. It's a great tool. It can be used well, or it can also be used incorrectly and misinterpreted. Yeah.
So let me ask a little bit more directly the importance of image quality, because think back to a few years ago when it was great to have our first generation of retinal imaging with OCT technology. The images then weren't anything compared to today, and there are a number of manufacturers of OCTs today that have maybe minimal quality, and there are some that have maximal quality. How does that accentuate your ability to make a proper diagnosis, or does it not matter at all?
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge issue with image quality. And going back to the case example of the patient with the VMT, that's a tiny little lesion. So you have to have something that has the resolution to see, that small blip in the photoreceptor line. You may have to choose the correct scan to get to see that. Doing a radial scan over the fovea, cutting through the fovea many times, it's going to give you a greater chance to see that. So that is huge. And especially whenever we're looking at these things with such subtle detail now, you think about these conditions like nudes that just cause a subtle sort of disheveling of your RPE and your photoreceptor lines. If you don't have the resolution to distinguish those lines, you can't see that they're altered. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I kind of look at it, and again, Jessica's so young, she doesn't remember. But remember, Chris, I know you'll know. At one point in life, we had a black and white TV, and it was great. And you thought life couldn't get any better. And then you got a color TV, and you're like, oh my God, this is even better. Then we got flat screen, then we got high definition, and it keeps getting better and better and better. So that's not to say that the first ones didn't have value. My first OCT, my first time domain OCT, I got it. It wasn't great, but it had value. It helped. But they just get better and better and better. And, how much better they need to be and what type of level do we have to look at things on? I don't really know, but they just keep getting better and better, and it makes life, easier and more enjoyable, and It looks better, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I totally can relate to that. Jessica, were you going to say something?
Well, one thing I was going to say to that point, Steve makes a good point. Even with imaging quality that wasn't as high resolution, some patients even today, based off of the other ocular conditions they have, you might not be able to get a great quality image, but sometimes you can still get something that gives you information. So I was just going to make that point too. I mean, some of these guys have mediopacity cataracts. You may not get the perfect scan that you would normally, but you may be able to see valuable information on those scans. Yeah.
We do our due diligence at our college to try to employ as many brands of instrumentation as possible, so that our next generation of future doctors have had their hands on and can pretty early in their career discriminate one product from another because they've used them. I can tell you one of my favorite things about employing the SPECTRALIS by Heidelberg is the level of detail between each and every retinal layer. Because as you mentioned a moment ago, Stephen, what we initially employed, we saw the retina, but we could not identify individual layers. Do you think that ECPs know this, or the average provider, that there is a difference in image quality from one manufacturer to another?
I think there is good knowledge out there at this point that folks do have an understanding that each instrument can, do different things. But I don't think that that's something everybody is aware of, because we still have people come up and ask after lectures, how do you get such good quality images? I never get these types of quality images on my OCT.
Right.
well, don't go fire your technician because it may not be their fault. It may be that your instrument doesn't have the same resolution.
Yeah, I would say I think some people appreciate it and some, don't. Some people just look at it as, at what does it cost and, what's my
Right.
return on my investment, and don't really think that much about, the quality. And there's a reason why there's different price points, right? I mean, a BMW costs more than a Hyundai for a reason, right? So there is certainly differences in quality. That's not to say even the different ones won't get you to the same place, but it won't get you the same place quite as good, right?
I'm so glad you said that, because sometimes the audience thinks that we prep this stuff, but Jessica and Stephen have no idea what we're going to talk about, in what order. And Stephen, you led me directly into the next question that I was going to pose, which is one of the things I think that most ECPs are not aware of with this particular technology is that it's modular. In other words, you can get an entry-level unit that delivers the high quality scans and images that just mentioned, and start there. And that may be all that you need. And yet, if you find that, I want to add this piece to it, then it's upgradable without having to supplant a brand new purchase of a brand new unit. So for people in which, price point is a barrier for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, that's different levels. Well, if your price point barrier is here, there's a way to get this high quality technology at that price. And if you decide to upgrade later, then you can do that. I'm amazed that people are just unaware.
Yeah, it is. That's funny you say that, Chris, because I was talking about OCTA the other day, and someone said, I don't know why you would purchase both an OCT and an OCTA. And I was like, oh, they don't understand. You can add this onto your OCT.
Absolutely.
Yep.
One of the other myths that we busted on the last episode was the simplicity of use. I remember myself being trained for the very first time on the SPECTRALIS, and I entered the room thinking, okay, I really have to have my mental energy on because this is going to be a challenge. And within 2 minutes, I learned, okay, I don't know why I thought that, but I was totally wrong. This is not at all easy, not at all difficult. It's like playing a kid's video game.
Yeah, Steve and I spoke a little bit about that while you were away. Different instruments do, work differently. They are a little bit different to teach your technicians on. And I think personally the Heidelberg is easy to learn, but it may be a little more challenging for some of the entry-level technicians, just the way it works. But, for us, it's very intuitive because it works like a slit lamp. You move it around the patient. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I would much prefer to be moving the instrument around the patient than have these patients moving their heads around in the instrument. So,
sure.
It may be a little more of a learning curve at first, but once that skill is there, ultimately, a very nicely usable machine.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. I never do it myself. I just don't. I'm not going to lie to you. I've got, residents and techs, so I don't do it myself. But, every year the new residents come in and within moments they can figure out how to do it. Yeah. Whether or not they have rotated through a place that had a Heidelberg or not, to be honest with you, whether, like you say, it's from them all being good at video games or using the slit lamp or using other instruments, it really hasn't really been a problem. And, the newer units, since they scan so fast, right? So many more scans per second than the first ones, you get less artifacts. Patient movement is less of a factor. So they're actually a little bit easier, I think, to capture now than they were before, because you'd have to yell at the patient, no, don't move, don't move, don't move. Now it's not that big of a deal since they scan so darn quickly.
So true. I remember as a resident, we used to do the posterior pole scans all the time. This was 7-8 years ago, and trying to keep everyone still and keep, from inverting scans, that was tough, but that is much, much less of an issue now.
The example that I have from a personal perspective is last summer, my son was a 21-year-old college student, and he worked as a brand at Jessica's practice, and he had never had his hand on a slit lamp. never interacted with a patient, never used any other technology. And within moments, he could capture high quality scans with this instrumentation. Now, he knows how to play video games, but that's pretty much it. So I think
he did a good job. He really did.
So all this to say is, if the eye care community, and we'll just say optometry, just as an example, were made aware that there is a possibility for low cost to entry in employing Heidelberg Spectralis in practice, superior image detail, which we've talked about, and ease of use, would you expect, if people were aware of this, it may gain more ground in general ophthalmology practice?
I would expect so. I think it's difficult. You get used to certain things and it is hard to shift. And I've seen that, interestingly enough, even a little bit at Southern College whenever we got the Heidelberg. Chris, how long do you think that was?
That's true.
5?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've had it a long time, and it did take people a moment to migrate from their comfort zone of what they were using previously. So you see your point was well taken.
It does. You get used to one machine and you get used to how you analyze that machine, and change is always a little bit difficult. But I do feel, even at the school, as folks saw the quality of the instrument, at first there was sort of this hesitation, like, oh, this is new, I'm not sure I want to get into this. But as they saw the quality and what it could produce, I think that at this point, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, that there's quite a high demand at the school for that particular OCT to be done.
100%.
Yeah, but Chris, I do think there's a little bit of a misconception, perhaps in the optometric community, that the Heidelberg is too expensive, out of our price range,
Right.
And also that it's too fancy. It's only used by retinal specialists and not in general practices. So I do think there's a little bit of a disconnect there, a little bit of a misconception,
I agree.
in the community. So.
Yeah, that was the exact reason, because I wholeheartely agree on why I did a podcast on this topic, because I don't know where misconceptions stem from. They stem from something, but it was an apropos time to try to break them down.
Class is ended for today, and we have no exams or grades approaching. Please email me at foureyeedprofessor@gmail.com if there are topics that you would like to hear and see through a professor's eyes.